All right, we are filming. This is episode 2, hoagie rolls slash sub rolls slash grinder rolls. It is August 5th. So today we are making bread dough, specifically pizza dough from Joe Beddia's book Pizza Camp, which is a fantastic book for people who, like me, are kind of pizza obsessive at home. So we're going to be making the exact dough recipe out of this book. I will link to provide a link in the description of where to get this book, and we'll kind of talk more about that as we go. Okay, so this pizza dough that we're going to make is actually going to be made into sub rolls, and yeah, let's get to it. So, two special pieces of equipment that we need to talk about before we get into everything. So when it comes to baking bread, baking by weight generally is always going to be a lot more accurate than baking by volume. For example, this recipe is 100% in weight measurements, so every ingredient is measured in grams. The reason that that's better for home bakers and for professional bakers, whomever, is that not only is it more accurate, but it also gives you a better understanding of the baker's percentage, which is an understanding of the ratio of one ingredient relative to the other. So for example, this bread dough that we're making consists of 500 grams of flour, and everything else is based off of that weight. So we're going to start off by getting our flour measured. Oh, yes. So, two things. Two digital scales. So I call this my momma scale. This is the one that's going to weigh things of a larger mass. And then when it comes to measuring very small, minute quantities of things like yeast and salt, I have this smaller digital scale. This is called a jeweler's scale. This measures to the nth of a degree. So this is really good for measuring very small quantities of things. And the momma scale is great for measuring your larger masses. So we're going to employ both. So let's get to it. I've got all of my stuff set up over here, everything we need. So the first thing we're going to do is measure out our flour. So this recipe requires 500 grams of flour. I tend to opt for bread flour. I think we're gonna have to do a combination of the two since I'm running out of bread flour, but we need 500 grams. So I'll start by adding that to the bowl. We might have enough in this bowl here, but if we don't, we'll supplement with all-purpose flour, but I think we'll be okay. Bread flour has a larger protein content than an all-purpose flour, so it's really good for bread because it gives you a more chewy, stronger dough, which is ideal for something like this, a pizza dough. Boom, boom. I think we'll be okay here, running low, but yeah, we'll be fine. 435. 452, getting down to the wire. I had just enough. Wow, exactly 500. Good, that is that. So actually I did this reverse. Let's actually start with the water and such. So the flour is already good. We need another bowl to measure water. And let's see, what do we need here? According to my recipe, 355 cool water. Hmm. 355. And almost enough. 4. Good. 2 grams over, but that is a-okay. So to our water, we're going to add half a teaspoon of instant yeast. This is just your classic envelope of Fleischmann's instant yeast. That is the yeast that I always keep on hand. So we need half a teaspoon. Half a teaspoon in. We also need some sugar in the water as well. According to my recipe, we need 10 grams of it. Grab some sugar. Where are you at? Ba-ba-ba. Here you are. Sucre, 10 grams of it. One gram over, not a big deal. Okay, going to give the water, yeast, and sugar a whisk. So for this recipe, the author of the book does not advise mixing the yeast with the salt from the outset. He believes that that can be problematic for the yeast if the yeast comes in contact with the salt. That's kind of been debated before in the bread baking world. I've seen some people say that you should keep them separate. Some people say that it's totally unnecessary, but I'm following his recipe exactly as it's written. So we're gonna add the salt later on down the road, but I'll explain as I go. So that is whisked to combine. Now we're going to add 10 grams of olive oil. This is extra virgin olive oil. So the inclusion of fat, in this case olive oil, the inclusion of fat in the dough makes this dough enriched. So enriched dough in bread baking lingo means a dough that has additives to it other than the basic flour, water, yeast composition. So in this case, we are enriching the dough with both fat by way of olive oil and sugar. So those two things make this an enriched dough. A classic French baguette or like a crusty hearth bread, like a boule or whatever, those typically won't have additives like fat or sugar, so those are considered to be lean doughs. Lean referring to the fact that it is fat-free. But this is an enriched dough. The sugar helps to aid in browning down the road, and the olive oil kind of helps to tenderize the dough, which I have found that the addition of olive oil really makes this dough very fun and very easy to manipulate and work with down the road. All right, so that is that. Now we are going to merge these two worlds together. So our scales are done for now. Get those out of the way. All right, here comes the fun part. So now we add water, oil, yeast, sugar, all to the flour. And then my favorite tool for combining all of this is a rubber spatula. This is my paddle-like tool of choice. And we just start folding very gently as to not make a big floury mess on my countertop. And the goal here is to incorporate every bit of moisture into the flour. So at the end, we want a shaggy, very shaggy mess of dough that's going to look like nothing. It's just going to look shaggy and wrong even. But right now, this is just the incorporation step. So I kind of just slosh and scrape the sides of the bowl and try to get all of that flour moistened. Also, this is a multi-day process, so don't expect to start this at 3 p.m. on a Monday and have rolls by 5 p.m. This is going to happen over the course of a few days. So this is day one. I call this formation day. We are forming everything today. Okay, now, scrape this excess off. Now I go in avec la main and kind of press the dough around the bowl. And what I do is I take the dough and I scrape the side of the bowl to incorporate all of those little bits of flour off of the walls of the bowl. And that is looking perfect at this stage. This is done entirely by hand. We're not going to use any sort of appliance to do this. This is a 100% handmade dough, which is very awesome because this sort of dough is very approachable for a home baker because you don't need to have some sort of very specific piece of machinery to make this possible. The only thing that you really need are a digital scale, which I think every home kitchen should have. You should have some sort of scale. Not only for bread, but just for quantifying things and other applications. So, okay, there it is. So that cohesion is done. Again, it looks very saggy and just rough, but this is good. This is what this is supposed to look like at this stage. So our dough has been formed. So now I take this big lid to a skillet that I have, and we are going to cover this dough for 30 minutes. And we're gonna come back 30 minutes later. This resting period, let me get this going first so I don't talk over beeps. So 30 minutes on the clock, and leave this covered on the counter. You can either cover it with a lid or a baking sheet or something large, a platter even, or you can do plastic wrap, but something to cover the bowl for 30 minutes. And this resting period is going to kind of make the dough relax, build a little bit of gluten. We're going to come back once 30 minutes has elapsed, and we're going to do the first round of gluten building kneading, and then we'll go from there. Okay, 30 minutes has elapsed, and let's remove our cover. And you might not be able to tell, however, this dough already looks smoother than it did 30 minutes prior. So during that 30 minutes, the flour has had an opportunity to hydrate, and the dough is going to be slightly more workable at this stage. So now we add the salt. So I do want to mention something pretty critical here. When I made the pizza camp dough the first time, the pizza that resulted from the dough was very salty. I wouldn't say that it was inedibly salty, but my partner and I were like, whoa, this is really, really salty pizza. So I went back to the book. I was curious as to why that was, and I wondered if I made a mistake or whatever. And I did the math, and I determined that Beddia's dough is a 4% salt dough. What that means is that 4% of the weight of the flour in the dough is salt. So I forget what the exact gram measurement of that was, but 4% in the bread world is very, very high salt content, and I found it to be a little too salty, so I reworked this recipe slightly. The only change that I've made is I reduced the salt quantity to make this a 2.5% dough. That kind of falls more in line with your typical bread dough and pizza dough. So this is 2.5% of the weight of the flour. In this particular case, in this little portion cup, I have 13 grams of salt. So now is when we add this salt. This is the stage at which we add it. I'm just gonna sprinkle it all on. It looks like a lot of salt, but that is the amount that we need. Now, I'm going to take a very wet hand, This will help prevent my hands sticking to everything. And now we're gonna go in and do what are called stretch and folds. So I'm literally going to pull the dough up and fold it over on itself. Rotate the bowl, pull the dough, fold it down on itself. So what I'm doing is I'm releasing the dough from the floor of the bowl and just pressing it down. So I'm incorporating the salt by doing this. And this is the initial kneading step that's going to really build the gluten network of the dough. So really quite literally, I'm just grabbing the dough, I'm letting gravity kind of pull it down, then I'm folding it in on itself. And I'm repeating that process over and over again. And having a wet hand helps in keeping your hand from getting super sticky. We're gonna keep doing this until the dough seems to get more elastic and more smooth. This is looking really good. Ba-ba-ba. Is my dough kneading technique perfect? Probably not. Does it matter? No, not at all. Don't feel discouraged if you don't think your technique is perfect. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really matter as long as your bread comes out tasty and delicious and you can sit down to dinner. That's the whole point. If your pull and fold technique is not perfect, c'est la vie. This looks good. I'm gonna get my hand moistened again. I'm getting a little sticky. Come back and continue at it. This is getting to be pretty much done. So you can see there's no dry bits of flour anywhere. That bowl is clean for the most part. And I would say that looks like it's almost done. So you're really looking for it to smoothen out like it is here. And it's definitely building some strength because I can pick it up pretty much fully, which is a sign that your gluten network is developing in real time. As you pull it and fold it, you are building your gluten network, which is the goal. Okay, so that is done. We are going to cover this bowl with plastic wrap. Just to make sure it has a seal that's not letting any air in. That's good. So that is done and it's ready for the fridge. So I always throw a label. There it is. So tag your dough, dude. Now, this dough is going to go into the refrigerator for 24 hours. This is called a cold ferment. So fermenting your dough in the fridge in a cold environment is going to achieve a couple of interesting things. One of them being it's going to allow the yeast to metabolize and do its yeasty thing, but at a slower rate, because remember, yeast is a living organism and yeast activity can be hindered or elevated by the temperature at which the yeast is doing its thing in. So in the refrigerator, the yeast will continue to metabolize and do its thing, but at a slower rate. This is going to allow the dough to kind of get filled with the flavors and the byproducts of the yeast over a longer period of time, and it ultimately results in a more flavorful dough. So in this case, patience will pay off for you. So not only does a cold fermented dough give you more flavor in the final product, it's also going to continue to form gluten as it sits over a long period of time. So this is going to go in the fridge for 24 hours. And then once 24 hours is up, I gotta find some space for this, we will return and do the portioning and shaping, and we'll go from there. It is almost 24 hours later. This guy has been cold fermenting that entire time. So let's take off this plastic. Now, if you smell it, it smells bready and yeasty. You can see that it's definitely risen at least twice in volume. So this looks good. What we're going to do now is flour our bench here. We're going to turn. Now what we're going to do here is liberate this guy from the bowl. And then spill it out onto the counter. So now we have this big blob of dough. So what we're gonna do is this, so the side that's facing me was the side that was facing the floor of the bowl, and this reverse side was the top of the dough. So what we're gonna do is form this entire mass into a ball. So this is the technique. So you take the northernmost corner, fold it in, you kind of bring all these corners together, like so. You're kind of folding it in on itself, like that, flipping it over, and then forming this into a ball. And if you look, getting close here, it's beautifully smooth. I mean, this is just gorgeous. You can see these little bubbles. So this dough has a lot of life in it. So this is formed. And then we're going to divide this in half by weight, exactly. So let's see what we have here. This should be around 2 pounds. So this is 873 grams. So what's 873 divided by 2? I don't really know. Go ahead and boom. This needs some more. 437, we're getting there. You might not be able to see that. That's good enough. Okay, so similarly, this is sticky, so be mindful. Same process. Oh, very sticky. Flour this. Okay, we're gonna do the folding procedure again with this ball. Flip and make a very tight ball. Using the friction of your hands and the counter to form this tight ball. You can see the seam has been pretty much sealed. And that is that. Leave that off to the side. Same thing with this guy. And keep in mind it's awfully sticky, which is good because that means that the dough has a pretty high hydration, meaning that that will translate to being a crisp crisp and light dough down the road. Crisp and light bread. And there it is. The 2 dough balls right there. So, we're gonna go ahead and take a quarter sheet tray here and get a little bit of flour down on there. Just a bit. And these dough balls are going to go right down on the sheet. Beautiful. So those are done. Those are ready to be wrapped in plastic. And these are going to go back into the fridge. Well, so this is labeled and ready to go. These are going to go back into the fridge for upwards of another 24 hours. So the author in the book recommends that you don't exceed that 24-hour second cold rise because it will be, it'll have negative effects on the dough. So into the fridge you go, and we will see this later. It is bake day, day number 3. All of your hard work and patience and dutifulness has paid off to this very day. Okay, so these doughs have been fermenting for about another 24 hours. They did their second cold rise, and you can see that they've definitely touched a bit on the sheet tray, but that is a-okay. So we're gonna go ahead and draw a wedge between them, like so. And we are going to get these rocking. So we're making these into sub rolls. I've said that a bunch at this point. So let's flour our bench. Liberate one of our doughs. This is kind of the tricky part, is getting it off the, let's flour this too. Getting it off the tray can be a bit tricky, but liberally flour this because it's pretty sticky. All right, boom, here we go. So, coat that in flour. We are going to now pat this circle into a rectangle. A rectangle about a foot long. You can see these bubbles. These big bubbles indicate that there's a lot of life in the dough. What I mean by life is actual yeast activity. So these bubbles are the result of yeast producing carbon dioxide, blah, 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 yada, yada. So I'm just gonna pinch that. We don't really need a big bubble. Not really advantageous for us. But I'm letting gravity kind of stretch the rectangle down. Like so. Again, this dough is extremely easy to work with. As long as you make sure that there's enough flour on your bench, you're not gonna run into any sticking issues. And this is straight from the fridge. You could let it sit out for a bit, but I tend to like to work with it straight out of the fridge. And also because I am somewhat impatient at this point. I want to get these done with. So I would say that that is about a foot in length. Let's even double check with my, yeah, it's about a foot. A hair over 12 inches. So now we're going to roll this into a tight cylinder. I'm not very good at this, but practicing. Like so. And then we're going to pinch the seam closed as best we can. Again, my technique is not wonderful, but I'm learning. Pinch this closed. That looks pretty good. And that is your completed cylinder. So it's about 1 foot long, a couple of inches across widthwise, and this is ready to go onto our prepared pizza peel. So instead of having flour down on our peel, we have parchment down as our launching aid. If you were making a pizza, typically you'd have semolina flour down on the peel and the pizza would launch naked off of the peel, but we're gonna be using parchment paper for this. So that is your post-bake sub roll. We're gonna transfer him over to our parchment and let this guy chill out while we form his brother. Here next to its cousin. And these guys look pretty awesome. Two little bread soldiers ready for duty. What do you think, Faith?
That's great.
Is that a good analogy? Two bread soldiers ready for duty? Ready for service? What is an overseas tour in breadland? All right, cool it down. So those are done, and those slide freely on the peel. And we're gonna let these chill out on the counter for like 7 minutes, and then we will launch them. Okay, about 10 minutes has elapsed, and these rolls are finally ready for their debut in the oven. So, in the oven is preheated at about 425 degrees Fahrenheit with a baking steel in the middle-ish part of the oven. So, without further ado, let's launch these. So we will time the bake. These will take maybe about 12 minutes and we'll probably spin them about halfway through. It's been exactly 20 minutes and these rolls are done. So let's get them out of the oven. Roll number 1. Ooh, hot. And roll number 2. Get this oven off. And these are your beautiful finished, complete rolls right there. Let's bring them out into the natural light so you can see these. Oh, and June is taking a poop. That is great. There it is. 2 beautiful rolls. So, if you notice, they have these kind of irregularly shaped, I believe these are, excuse me, I believe these are called ears. These little kind of ridges that form when the bread rises in the oven. But these look pretty awesome. What do you think? Check the underside. Not too dark. These look good. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Cool. And that is that.